Welcome everybody. My name is Stacy Fritz. I am your moderator today and one of the patient advocates at Believe Big. We're so happy for those of you who are able to join us. And as mentioned, please don't worry if you have to hop off or maybe you jump on later on. This session will be recorded and be sent out in with a link within the next 24 hours. It's truly my pleasure to welcome back Paula Weinberg. She is one of our most favorite oncology nutritionist, and she's also the owner of HealthSpan Nutrition. I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of our session today because we have quite a bit of content to cover. I, for one, and I know I say this each and every week, I am really excited about this topic. I think I get excited about all the topics that Paula brings us because she's a wealth of information, research-based, and I know that she does an incredible job in helping people heal along this journey, this unexpected journey. So you're in for a treat today because we are going to be covering the book called Eating on the Wild Side. The author is Joe Robinson. The last time we were on, we covered a book called Glucose Revolution. And if you weren't able to join us again, that's listed on our website at believebig.org. I highly recommend because the last session I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed because it was real actionable items that we could take away from the session and apply immediately in our day-to-day nutrition. And I have a funny feeling today is no different. So without further ado, just a quick reminder, the chat feature has been disabled. That's not that we don't want to hear from you because of course we do. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you hover your cursor, you can ask your questions there. I will field the questions and pass them to Paula as she moves through the content. We may wait until the end and we may take a couple as we go along. Regardless, today is about giving you information about eating on the wild side. And so we won't be able to field questions about specific diagnoses or particular specific questions pertaining to the person who's asking the question. That doesn't mean we can't. And I will give you that information at the end as well. So sit back and enjoy. I'm going to pass the baton to my dear friend and colleague, Paula, and put myself on mute and field those questions. So Paula, please feel free to take it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stacy. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here, and so we can get started. And we're going to, here we go. All right. So I have shelves and shelves full of awesome books that I just love and have learned so much from. So I decided, that was going to be inspiration for some of the series of these webinars, because there are so many, there's just so much to talk about with health, nutrition, cancer. And this was just a really actionable, tangible way to kind of put this into kind of a smaller container and make it manageable to kind of broach a topic and dive into it a little bit to whet everybody's appetite for it, and also give them some actionable things they could kind of take away from it right away. So this great book by Joe Robinson is called Eating on the Wild Side. And obviously there's a lot more content in this book that we're not going to be able to get to today, but it's available on Amazon and so forth. So you can certainly, if this topic appeals to you, you can certainly pick up the book, and I encourage you to do that. And it's really very accessible and easy to read because it's broken down by sections and food. And so it's not the kind of book you have to read cover to cover to get the most out of. It's very much a book you can kind of pick up and read sections of and go out and put that information into action. So a little bit about the author. Joe Robinson is a best-selling author. She's written many books. She's an investigative journalist who has dedicated a lot of her time to reading research and trying to figure out how to put the nutrients back, get us back in touch with the nutrients that are getting that are missing from our food. And when farming came into play thousands of years ago, the domestication of plants and animals was kind of a new thing. I mean, for us, it's been happening for hundreds of years. And so back as far as we can remember, or our ancestors can remember, this is a normal thing. But going a little further back, this is a really unusual step. The step that we began, the agricultural revolution of domesticating plants and animals, staying in one place versus being kind of nomadic and going where the food was and moving around to where the food was. We decided to sort of stay put, build little communities and villages, and domesticate plants and animals for our use and our food. So as that happened, the vitamin, mineral, and antioxidant, fiber content, of so forth of these foods began to dwindle, because when we relied on plants that were, and animals, but we're focusing on plants today, that were grown in the wild, these plants have no way of defending themselves against critters, insects, herbivore kind of critters that are going to eat them, whatever have you, the weather that comes and goes, that is unpredictable. So these plants have to create their own defense systems within to guard against the sun and the lack of regular rain, the pests that might come along, so forth, because all living things want to continue and go on and be alive. So there's this inner drive for survival within every living thing. So the wild cultivars of our plants were much more nutrient dense because they were left to their own devices to survive. And those things that they create within themselves, these phytonutrients, to guard against all of these various insults and injuries, make them very nutrient dense and very healthy for us. However, as we began to cultivate them and decided to stay in one place and become farmers, we started to breed plants that were, less bitter, higher in sugar, had a sort of softer skin maybe, or less seeds, those types of things. So over the years and decades and generations, our plants have become, high starch, lower in fiber, less bitter, kind of a lot of the things that are great about these original plants that were wild cultivars are no longer the case. For example, like when was the last time you ever got a seeded watermelon, right? So we've bred these things that we find to be nuisances or not as pleasant out of the plants. And that's just an obvious example of kind of how that's come along. But our ancestors didn't really need a lot of supplementation to replace what they're not getting from their food, because they were getting it from their food. Back, generations ago, a lot of people grew a lot of their own food. They supplemented what they couldn't grow with grocery store items, but it was much more common to grow your own food and to then be using soil that was very rich, because it was just soil used in your own family and supported for your own plants. Now we're, industrial farming, and so many things have really bred. The soil is stripped of its nutrients. The plants have been cultivated in such a way that they're not very nutrient dense. And it's kind of created this generational downslide of what we're actually getting in terms of input from our food. So we rely a lot more on supplements for that reason in the modern day and age, because it's really hard to get these from plants. So we're going to talk about some common grocery items. There are, dozens and dozens of great items in this book that are covered in detail, but obviously we only have so much time. So I thought I'd cover some of the more common things that we find in our grocery carts and see if we can kind of optimize our choices and how we eat and store them and prepare them to kind of make the most of them. So we're going to start with lettuce, and that's probably a pretty common item for most people. So most things, and a common theme you're going to find throughout this book and throughout our talk today, is that plants that are the most vibrant in color generally are also the most rich in phytonutrients. So when you take lettuces, you compare like an iceberg lettuce versus a red leaf lettuce, you can see visually that the iceberg lettuce is much less vibrant. There's much less color. Iceberg lettuce is mostly water, and it's a pretty low phytonutrient intake, on a plant scale. So the most nutritious lettuces that you can buy are those that are really rich and deep in color, the red, purple, and reddish brown ones. deep dark green ones. And another thing that's really interesting about lettuces, when they are grown in such a way where they have a really tight head, where they're not opened up to the elements, again, the plant doesn't have to do too much to survive because it's kind of already got a survival mechanism in that it's tightly knit, and only the outer, leaves are exposed. The more exposure that the leaves have as they grow to the elements, the more nutrient dense you're going to find the plant to be. So that's why the loose leaf versus a tight head, the loose leaf is going to be more nutrient dense than the tight headed, like iceberg lettuce type would be. So the book goes into detail on very specific cultivars and items of each of these foods of what to look for. Generally speaking, in a grocery store, you're not getting a specific species name of what you're eating anyway. So I thought we'd keep it general. If you like that kind of information, or if you're a gardener and a home gardener and want to grow some of these foods, there is a lot of information in here about which seeds to plant and which ones to grow for the most bang for your buck. So you see here, in terms of lettuce rankings, we have the red loose leaf lettuce is ranked number 1 in terms of nutrients. The dark green loose leaf would be number 2, and then a red or dark green bib lettuce and romaine would be the third kind of choice in terms of nutrient content. It's also interesting that the preparation, and storage can really make a difference also, because a lot of us, again, are buying these things and they're in our refrigerators for quite a while before we, either eat them or finish them. So we want to make sure that we're also storing things correctly to kind of maximize the nutrients that are in the item when we get it home from the store. So lettuce we're obviously not cooking with, but if you tear up lettuce before you store it, it can double its antioxidant value. The living plant responds to the insult of the tear kind of as if it was an insect, injury out in the wild. So it creates a burst of phytonutrients to fend off like an intruder or a pest. So then when you eat the greens, you benefit from that added antioxidant protection. But once you do tear them and you do kind of damage the leaf, it's also subject to going bad faster. So you kind of have to weigh that in your own life. If you're going to be able to eat it quickly, then, you might do that ahead of time. The other thing, storage wise, plants that are, that we're eating, that we'll be talking about today, they're alive, they're growing things. And when they're cut and sent to, they're harvested and cut and sent to distribution in a grocery store, they're obviously kind of on their way to dying, right? Once they're cut and harvested, they're already starting to die. So how do we preserve those nutrients and all of the things that are great about this plant in the process of where we get it, and it's sort of on downward spiral into decay that we don't know when we're getting it along that, along that spectrum either. So one of the great things about storing lettuce they recommend is a micro perforated bag. So what you do is you take a bag that you use for storage for, your lettuces or greens or any of your produce, and you take a needle or a safety pin or something, and you prick tiny little holes into it. They're not necessarily big visible holes. They're just tiny little holes that allow for the plant to kind of respire and have oxygen access while still containing a lot of the moisture of the plant to kind of help it also retain that moisture that it needs, obviously, with the salad green. So that's lettuce. And we're going to go on to arugula.
Paula, excuse me, before we
Yeah,
move on, just a quick question about lettuce.
sure.
We had a listener, Lori, wanted to know, what are your thoughts about the organic cloth produce bags for storage? Are you familiar with those?
Well, I don't know that a cloth storage bag is what you want to use for lettuce, because you're probably going to let out too much of the moisture with a cloth bag. It's nice to be able to use those when you're purchasing, so you can reuse bags and not add to the plastic, issue we have in the world, and the recycling issues with all that. But I think for storage, you want to get maybe some reusable bags that you can, wash and reuse. There are silicone bags. I don't know how well the silicone bags, if you prick them, because of the rubbery nature of it, if it'll allow that space, that small hole to exist, or if it'll kind of close back up almost because it's so rubbery. So I don't know if silicone works great for the pin pricking, but I would stick with plastic in this case, even though it's, counterintuitive to advocate plastic necessarily with food.
Great.
Okay, so moving on to arugula. Now, this will be true of many of the plants that we might talk about. There are always sort of a version or a specific plant, maybe that might be the best or a better, plant in terms of higher in nutrients than, a general category like lettuces. So arugula is a type of lettuce, but it's actually from the cabbage family. And it has all of those great anti-cancer benefits that the cabbage family, those cruciferous vegetables, do. So there are specific things about arugula that we're gonna kind of go over. So arugula is peppery in flavor, and it kind of has this specific shape to it. You see these kind of like jagged little leaves, and they're all kind of long and skinny. There's a good bit of stem involved, and they're a peppery kind of distinct flavor. They are higher in antioxidants than most green lettuces, and they have, in fact, more calcium, magnesium, folate, and vitamin E than, your sort of run-of-the-mill lettuce. Unlike typical lettuce, you don't usually cook with lettuce, but arugula can be sauteed, and you can also, it's great for pesto sauce, which if you're familiar with that, you kind of use a packed green with some olive oil, garlic, lemon. Some people do use Parmesan in a pesto, but you can definitely make it without. And it makes a great way to kind of really maximize your nutrients by buzzing down your, because you're really packing in that volume that you necessarily couldn't eat if you were sitting down to a salad. But having that as a pesto, which you can drizzle then on, your salmon or something else that you're eating, even other roasted veggies like a cauliflower that's kind of, maybe a little bit more bland, you can drizzle that arugula pesto over it. And you can also combine it with other herbs like cilantro or parsley and kind of have a combo pesto. It does spoil quickly. And again, it does best stored in a micro perforated bag in your crisper drawer. Broccoli, another powerhouse, right? So this is a known anti-cancer food. Again, this is from the same family that arugula is from, and it has a lot of the glucosinates and antioxidants that make it a great food for healing from cancer and for just being healthy and well. So broccoli, just like all other plants, is alive, and once it's harvested and cut, it starts to lose its nutrient value really quickly. So it's called, respiration, because plants, just like us, they're breathing and interacting with the oxygen in the environment. So it can lose its nutrients really fast. And you might have had really bitter broccoli, and that's because it's pretty old. So if your broccoli is tasting really bitter, you'll know that it's really on its downward end of usefulness, and it's probably been in storage and in transit a long time before it got to you. The sweeter and more vibrant the food is, it's generally fresher. So this is why we've again suffered a lot of nutrient loss in our modern day age, because we are subject to, most of us, whatever we can buy in the grocery store, and a lot of us have no control over how long that food has been in transit. I shop at Trader Joe's a lot, and while I love it, here in Maryland, the closest, a lot of the food that Trader Joe's stocks, the produce comes from California. So by the time that food has been cut, packaged, and transported across country, it's probably weeks old. And a lot of the times, honestly, at Trader Joe's, it looks like it's weeks old. Like you can tell it's already on its down, on its last legs. So you want to really look for things that are fresher because you're going to get more nutrient value out of it, and it's obviously going to taste better. So farmers markets in the summertime are great for these things because they allow you to kind of really minimize that transit time that the food goes through after it's cultivated, after it's harvested. So you want to have dark green crowns, close like that beautiful picture on top of the broccoli. You want to have it, no yellowing. The stem shouldn't be kind of pocked and dry looking. Again, that's hard to find, I find, in stores. Most of it looks exactly like it's, we're describing here what not to buy. That's exactly what I usually see in the stores. So it's generally hard to find these things really fresh, but this is what you're looking for in an ideal situation. Again, broccoli does respire rapidly and quickly, and it does need that micro perforated bag in the crisper drawer. If you get a whole head, you're going to be, again, a little less loss of nutrients versus something that's already pre-cut into florets. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the raw versus cooked situation. So the best way to cook broccoli, if you're going to cook it, is to steam it, because you don't want to have it have contact with the water, because you're going to lose nutrients if it has contact with the water. So a quick steam for up to 4 minutes, and then take it off the heat right away. Or you can lightly saute it in, extra virgin olive oil with some garlic is a great flavor profile too. Kind of double your anti-cancer nutrients there and get more bang for your buck. But cooking the broccoli with oil isn't going to have you lose the nutrients. And in fact, having a healthy fat with your vegetables helps you absorb a lot of those nutrients even better. So it's great to do that. Whatever your preference, you can lightly steam it first, make a big batch, keep it in the fridge, and then take it out and saute it in some a quick saute with some seasonings like garlic, onion, etc. And that way you'll have it on hand and have a quick meal. So it's
Paula,
Mhm.
let me stop us here. We have two good questions, or all good questions. What is your opinion about frozen versus raw or cooked? That's always a fan
Yeah.
favorite question. Want to comment on that first?
Yeah. Frozen broccoli, I'll read you right from her book, Joe Robinson. Frozen broccoli is convenient, but it is less nutritious than fresh broccoli. Like all vegetables, broccoli contains natural enzymes that have to be destroyed before it's frozen, or the flavor and overall quality will degrade. The standard way to deactivate the enzymes is to steam or boil the vegetable for a few minutes, a process called blanching. And recent tests show that blanching broccoli destroys a third of its glucosinates, which is, again, one of the anti-cancer parts of it, before it even hits the freezer. So it's definitely going to be less nutritious than getting really fresh broccoli. But life's on a continuum, right? Is frozen broccoli better than no broccoli? Of course it is. So it's kind of all relative to the choices that you have versus kind of looking at it as an absolute. No one is saying never eat frozen broccoli. If that's the only way you can kind of keep it around or keep it in your rotation, then do that if that's what works for you. But fresh is optimal, and obviously organic is also optimal.
Yeah, that was going to be my part B to that question, is that all the foods that you're discussing today, we want to make sure that we let our listeners know that purchasing an organic variety of these is a really good strategy. This one stumped me a bit, and I'm curious if it'll stump you. So, Leandra, that's to say that we love your question, but this may be one that we have to take offline. So I'm just going to put it out there, Paula, and you'll let me know.
Okay.
Leandra wants to know, do you have any recommendations for the best wild foods that we're talking about that you could eat during a chemotherapy appointment? Are there foods that might support a chemotherapy appointment in your opinion?
Well, this goes into, certainly far from our topic today, but as a general rule, I would not be advocating that somebody be eating during chemotherapy, period. So no, I mean, there's no food I'd recommend during chemo. And the foods you would be kind of having in your rotation is sort of kind of what we're talking about more so today, not
Yes.
specific necessarily to that circumstance. But yeah, I would not recommend eating during chemo at all. So I think
So,
that's,
Leandra, let's do this. We're gonna let Paula keep going, but just please know at the end of our session today, we will talk about contact information for Paula. And then if you have further questions related to that, I'm really thankful, Paula, that you answered it on the outset there, but we'll make sure that Leandra gets what she needs if she has further detailed questions.
yep, great.
Cool.
Okay. So we're going to move on to carrots. Another probably common veg that a lot of us are getting on the regular at the grocery store. So orange carrots, which are pretty dominant as the only choice in most grocery stores, they're like a newish thing relative to time of plant life. It's only about 400 years that we've been cultivating the orange carrot. And there's a really cool story in this book about how kind of orange became the prized carrot, because obviously there are all different colors of carrots, from white to purple. And it's something about the plant breeders bringing it to the Netherlands to celebrate the House of Orange, which was something about the Netherlands revolt against Spain in the mid 16th century. I'll let you read it in the book if you want more info on that. But so this orange carrot became like this prized color because of what they were celebrating. And then it kind of outranked all the other carrots and became the dominant carrot, despite the fact that purple carrots are actually the most nutrient dense. So beyond that, you might not have many choices in the store, but obviously the deeper, the darker colored fruits and vegetables are the ones, again, that you can see are the most nutritious. I stuck a little screenshot of, she has a few of these graphs throughout the book, kind of showing the various nutrient kind of profiles of different plants. And so you could see the purple versus the orange. It's huge, really, and versus a white, or red. So it's a big difference in nutrients. If you can find the purple, great, go for those. Baby carrots are just kind of rejected regular sized carrots that have been kind of like rolled enough times that they're kind of like peeled down to little nubbins, and they're not necessarily kind of great for you.
Moms across America are like deflated in their seats and hearing that the, the baby
Yes,
carrot is, me too. I was like,
exactly.
oh goodness, no baby carrots because they are so cute, right? And
Yes,
dippable and all the things. So you heard it here first. Baby carrots are, what did you call them? Rejected nubs?
they're kind of they're regular sized carrots that have kind of been ground down to like these baby carrots size. So it says they're just misshapen mature carrots that have been whittled down to a small size, and the part that's thrown away, the outermost part, is really the more nutritious part of the carrot. So in general, with most foods, the skin and the outer leaves and the outermost part of the plant is where the nutrients are most concentrated, because again, think back to how it grows. It's exposed to the sun, it's exposed to pests. That outer layer has to be the most protective layer, where it's concentrating all of those kind of chemicals to ward off danger. So if you can avoid peeling your carrots, if you get them fresh enough and organic, and you just give them a nice little cleaning, or a little slight scrub with a brush, you're going to kind of retain a lot more nutrients than if you were peeling them. So it's best to leave them unpeeled, especially if you're buying organic and they're fresh. You won't find them too marked up. That's always good to do. So you want to choose them with their green tops on, because they, again, the less you damage the plant is after it's harvested, the more nutrients it's going to retain. So you want to choose them with their green tops. That makes them fresher and retain some of their nutrients. Let me just see here. So carrots are a little bit unusual, that they are more nutritious when cooked. A few different plants are, we'll cover some of them today. And so falcarinol is one of the anti-cancer compounds that's really great about carrots, and cooked carrots have 25% more than a raw carrot. So again, it's not to say you should never eat a raw carrot. It's about, everything's kind of on a spectrum and a balance point. So if you're in the mood for raw carrots, eat the raw carrots. But if you're cooking them, cook them whole, because when they're left whole, they retain more nutrients than when they're pre-cut before cooking. So cook them whole if you can, especially works well in soups. And they have the best nutrient absorption when they are prepared with a healthy fat like extra virgin olive oil, because again, certain vitamins and minerals are better absorbed with fats, and vitamins A, D, E, and K are the fat soluble vitamins. So obviously everybody knows vitamin A is strong, and beta carotene in carrots, and that needs fat in order to get into your cells properly. So go for the extra virgin olive oil when you're eating your carrots, and or another healthy fat. Store it in the crisper drawer in a sealed bag, because again, that kind of allows it to retain its moisture, because we have all seen a dried out carrot, and it's not
It's,
fun.
it's not pretty.
No, it's not.
So, Paula, this is a question that is a repeated question from many different conversations. Would you please comment on, for somebody who is on the cancering journey, we know that carrots have a higher sugar content, right? And so, could you just, we're not suggesting a recommendation, but we also know, like you said, there's a balance of information, and there are some very good things that we can get from consuming carrots, particularly these purple ones, these gorgeous purple carrots. What is your position on the fact that if somebody is trying to limit or avoid sugar, where does carrots fall into the conversation?
Right. Well, I think when you're talking about whole foods, and those are like, foods that kind of look on our plates very similar to how they look in nature growing. So that's kind of a whole food. It's minimally processed.
Right.
And so when we're talking about whole foods, generally there's a decent argument to be made that there's a place for all whole foods in everyone's diet. Again, where someone is in their cancer journey, and specifically, is fasting the right thing for them? Are they on a ketogenic diet? If they're on a ketogenic diet, carrots are probably not going to be in their wheelhouse, because they do have a high carb content. However, when you're just talking about someone who wants to be sure they're not overeating, too much sugars, I think, it's hard to overeat sugars from plants.
That's right.
You can't binge 15 apples, but you can certainly binge 15 Oreos. And I mean, I know I could in less than a minute, but you could never eat 15 apples in less than a minute. So
Yeah.
the fiber and the filling nature of these foods kind of slows you down and fills you up, and pairing it with a healthy fat and other foods, for example, eating carrot with a dark leafy green, that's a great balance, so that you're really cutting the speed with which it's metabolized, which we talked about this a lot last time in Glucose Revolution. So eating your greens kind of first lays that fiber foundation for the rest of your foods to kind of be having a slow burn in your system, versus kind of hitting the bloodstream really quick with a big burst of sugar. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the nature of carrots is it's hard to overeat them. I mean, it's possible to overeat any food, but if you prepare it well with some healthy fats, and you pair it with a lot of other good foods that are also whole foods, dark leafy greens is a great one, and some protein, I think you're going to be okay. But again, it might depend on what your goals are in terms
Right.
of your own carb intake, and that's really
Excellent.
specific to everybody.
So Leandra actually had a funny comment, and I think you'll appreciate. She said, "I've heard if you're not hungry enough to eat an apple, then you're really not hungry." Right. So to your point, but I just want to pause there for a minute because I think that was a great explanation. And I just can share that with working with folks for quite a period of time, and then also working with you, Paula, that we try really, really hard not to overwhelm with information because nutrition is constantly changing, number one. And number two, there's just this vast knowledge that when you pick one topic, you end up going down a rabbit hole. So I just want to be super clear that what Paula is suggesting is that we're talking about foods that are bringing in healing components and nutrients into the body, and yet it still is the same. She still has the same answer. Deciding on a particular specific way of eating is the answer is always going to be depends. It depends on what's happening in your particular situation. But the knowledge to understand, we know how great eating unprocessed whole foods are for the body in healing and in general, just overall really optimal health, is to educate yourself on where you get the most bang for your buck, and then kind of continue to drill down on what's good for your specific situation. So no, like she said, it's kind of hard to overeat on the carrot, hard to overeat on the broccoli, and things that look like they belong in nature typically end up being very good for us. And we are covering overall general categories. I hope that makes sense. And again, we're available, both of us. I'll pass you to Paula directly if you have specific questions, like I'm making this up. Should I be eating carrots when I've been diagnosed with X, Y, and Z? I'm just making it up. That would be a question for somebody like Paula to take a look at your particular situation and decide and help you hold your hand through the process to see what works for you and what supports optimal healing.
Right. Yes,
Yep.
absolutely. All right, I'm going to move to the next one. Tomatoes,
Yes.
another great one that is more nutritious cooked than raw. Doesn't mean you should never eat a raw tomato, not advocating that at all, just to kind of know, balance out kind of what you're doing and gives you options, right? So, tomatoes, are generally, it's kind of sad. Everyone knows this from eating tomatoes from the store, particularly. They kind of taste like nothing, right? Generally, they're kind of lack robust color. They lack robust aroma or flavor. And it's because what happens is with industrialized food and agriculture, she describes here in the book, tomato production is a billion-dollar industry, and the ripening process has become an exact science. Tomatoes are still picked at the breaker stage. So that means they're picked when they are still green, and they are not going to bruise in transit or get old and moldy. So they're shipped to regional warehouses where they're force ripened with precise amounts of ethylene gas. And ethylene gas sounds scary, but it's just the very same gas that plants emit as they ripen. So like bananas, if you want to ripen a food like an avocado, stick a banana inside a paper bag with an avocado and it'll ripen faster because that banana is going to give off ethylene gas. And they all do as they age, most plants, or I don't know if I should say all, but I think all. So they basically pick them when they're nowhere near ripe off the vines so that they again can maximize their profits by not having any loss or minimize their losses of shipping these food. This is actually a fruit of shipping these things around, because you can imagine how hard it would be to ship and maintain a fully ripe tomato to its final destination. So force ripened tomatoes can turn the requisite tomato red, even though they kind of get to the color stage. They're less sweet and they're more acidic than tomatoes that actually ripen in the sun. And the flavor and aroma are almost all, completely gone. So that's true even on the vine tomatoes. They just clip the vine with all the green tomatoes on it and they still kind of force ripen it. It's not necessarily ripened on the plant the way they kind of lead you to believe. But anyway, sort of moving ahead, what are we looking for in a tomato to kind of maximize our tomato purchase? You want to choose them by their color. Again, the theme, deep, dark colors give you kind of the most bang for your buck. So those deep red tomatoes have the most lycopene and vitamin C. I don't know if you've ever seen those medley of tomatoes, those sold in little clamshells. And I used to be less drawn to the dark purpley ones. I was kind of like, I like the yellow ones or whatever. They were prettier. But, understanding those dark, deep purpley ones have, kind of more to them. And actually, they actually tasted better when I sort of became drawn to them and realized that they were actually good for you. So the darkest red fruits always win the nutritional prize. Size matters too. So the smaller and the darker, the better with tomatoes. So there's a variety of tomato called a currant tomato, and it's the smallest tomato. And it's she calls it the superstar of tomato nutrition. And she gives the Latin name for the species of tomato in here in the book. And it says they are sold in most large supermarkets, this currant tomato. She said they're sold in plastic clamshells and blah, blah, blah. And there's sort of a one of the closest things to kind of a wild tomato that you'll get, which is why it's more nutrient dense. She does talk about the level of pesticide on the tomatoes, which is surprising because it's not something she focuses on in this book. As Stacy mentioned, generally speaking, with all produce, you really want to focus on organic. There's a lot of spraying of all of these crops. Dirty Dozen, Clean 15, if you need to prioritize, that's on the Environmental Working Group website. But she does talk about the tomatoes and the non-organic. So she said the standard pesticides used in the industry include a lot of very long chemical names, and they're all classified as bad actors by the Pesticide Action Network. And bad actors are known to promote cancer in lab animals and lab studies. So we want to talk about storage. Tomatoes, do not refrigerate them, store them at room temperature and eat them in a couple of days. They kind of get this really mealy, gross texture when you put them in the fridge. So they really just kind of start to break down. Tomato products, you want to kind of purchase them in glass containers if you're going to buy them as a, like a paste or a sauce or what have you, because they're very acidic, obviously, and they interact with that lining of the can more than some other foods. So really, ideally, you want to purchase them in a glass container. And because the cooking process really intensifies the nutrients, she talks about the longer you cook them, the more health benefits you get. The heat increases their food value in two ways. At first, it breaks down the fruit cell walls, making their nutrients more bioavailable. And second, it twists the lycopene molecule into a new configuration that's easier to absorb. So cooking it down, and tomato paste is sort of the most concentrated of the tomato products in terms of cooked products. So a cooked tomato paste is going to have 10 times the lycopene that, a raw tomato might have. So kind of good to know if you're going to, be on the lookout for kind of diversifying how to get some more bang for your buck out of some of these foods. Doesn't mean you have to stop eating raw tomatoes, but maybe you start adding tomato paste to some things you didn't normally add it to. Sauteed dark leafy greens is a great place to add some tomato paste. So moving along to another fan favorite, blueberries, right? We've all heard, and we all kind of know blueberries, a superfood, right? But believe it or not, cultivating, like domesticating a blueberry is only been happening for like 150 years, which is hard to imagine. Like that's a pretty short period of time. Before that, we just all kind of ate wild blueberries. They were so abundant and easy to grow and just everywhere. There was no need for it. So we started to cultivate them. And in this darker picture, it's hard to find a good picture of wild blueberries. It's almost hard to see the berries on that plant because, again, wild berries are really tiny, and cultivated berries, you could see the dramatic difference. We like them big, juicy, sweet, and really large. It's just kind of, the product of our modern age. Like we like to mega size everything. But we've also kind of diminished the nutrient value. So wild blueberries, again, for the same reasons we've talked about, are more nutrient dense. And we all know that they have wonderful benefits for anti-cancer, for brain health. There's a lot of studies about eating blueberries and reversing or slowing age-related dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Blueberries are great for your heart and cardiovascular system. They protect against, high cholesterol and keep the vascular system healthy. There's a lot of great benefits. Anything that's going to keep your vascular system healthy is going to keep your brain healthy, because your brain is a really intricate network of, blood vessels. So all of these things kind of all go hand in hand. Superfood. We don't want to wash these before we eat them, because we kind of wash off that protective layer that the plant naturally has. So once you do that, it kind of starts to break down faster. So don't wash them before you're ready to eat them, and store them in the crisper drawer. Eat them obviously as soon as possible. We all know berries go bad quickly. A little nice twist and a nice piece of good news for those of us that like to get our things frozen. Frozen are almost as nutritious as fresh, which is an exception to a lot of plants. So this is good. However, the flash freezing process that happens to kind of preserve and protect what's good about that berry, we want to do that in reverse. So if you buy frozen food, frozen blueberries, you want to thaw them in the microwave, which again, I'm not a huge microwave fan and generally not advocating microwave use. Thaw them in the microwave, because thawing them quickly, sort of the reverse of how they were frozen, preserves the most nutrients in the berry. So that's kind of an interesting thing that I learned. I certainly didn't know that before that.
Paula, does microwaving them, one of the listeners would like to know, does microwaving them diminish their nutrients?
Well, she doesn't, let me see. She does not address that. And I would assume that she would not advocate to microwave them if you were destroying the nutrients. So obviously you want to not over microwave, that might destroy. But she says that a new and important finding is that berries and many other foods should be flash thawed as well as flash frozen. So thawing the fruit in the microwave is the best way to do this. Intuitively, one would think microwaving frozen berries would destroy the nutrients, but the opposite is true. Berries thawed in the microwave retain twice as many antioxidants as berries thawed at room temperature or in the refrigerator. The thawing happens so rapidly, the nutrient destroying enzymes have little time to work. So again, you don't want to over microwave, you just want to get it to thawed quickly and not have that process happen over, hours perhaps versus seconds.
And
So that
then Annette asks, so if it's sold as wild, if the label says on it wild, does that mean it's organic and that they're literally harvested from the wild? What does that mean?
No, unfortunately, it gets tricky, right? Man has gotten involved in all of these things. So for example, I shop at Trader Joe's a lot. They have wild blueberries, then they have wild organic blueberries, they have regular organic they have like 4 or 5 different kinds of blueberries. And so wild doesn't necessarily mean, it's more of, I think, the species and the particular cultivar that they're allowing to cultivate there in their wherever in their farms, versus the actual a blueberry in the wild that they've harvested. So I think there's still spraying and pesticiding that goes along with these wild blueberries, unless they say they're also organic. So
Yeah, that's a really good. And the other thing that I'm thinking of as you're speaking through this, the cute little hands that are cupping all those blueberries. You want to comment on what wild blueberries and organic because these look like supersized blueberries. Our wild blueberries tend to look as robust, and they also look a lot smaller, even though that they're beautiful. I just have found that some of our healthier options kind of don't look as visually as beautiful as some of our engineered foods that have been cross whatever to be bigger, to be plumper, to be larger. The most beautiful of produce doesn't necessarily mean that it's as healthy, correct?
Exactly, exactly. And so I kind of led with that little tiny blueberry that you can see barely growing on that bush in the back in that dark picture on the slide. It's hard to even find the berries because they're tiny, and that's how wild blueberries are. And they never get that giant, no matter how long you leave them on the vine. So yeah, we tend to like our stuff supersized this modern day and age, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's the prettier and the bigger the better. So let's see here. Cooked blueberries, again, another winner. Cooked blueberries have more antioxidants than fresh blueberries. So she says even canned blueberries are better for you than fresh picked fruit, provided you also consume the canning liquid along with the berries. I'd have a caveat to that. I don't know anybody that has canned blueberries that don't have added sugars to it to preserve it. So I don't know. I wouldn't advocate canned blueberries for that reason. You can make your own kind of compote, blueberry compote. Do I have that on my website? I can't remember if it's on my website, but you can take frozen wild blueberries, organic, and thaw them in the microwave, very briefly, then put them on the stove and put them in with some monk fruit if you like to sweeten them a little bit, and maybe some chia seeds, and let it come to a boil and kind of thicken up. And then you kind of have your own blueberry compote if you want to use that. And again, that kind of same thing that went with the tomatoes, the lycopene that was rearranged and more easily assimilated by the body. It's sort of the same thing, is that the berries, the antioxidants in them are more, accessible.
Okay, Paula, real quick, because we have
Yeah.
about 10 more minutes with our crew here. Annette's going to take it a step further because I can see how the questions that are filtering in about the blueberries. We all love blueberries. So the question from Annette is, so if you had to choose at a store for blueberries or other produce, which one would you opt for? Would you opt for wild, not necessarily organic, or regular organic? Do you see where the confusion is coming into play? Could you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I buy wild organic blueberries when I can. Um, COVID has made it a little harder to find those even at Trader Joe's, but that is my go-to, is a wild organic blueberry is my preference. If that's not around, then I go then I just go organic blueberry
Yeah.
frozen. And I obviously I don't buy blueberries or berries when they're out of season because I'm in Maryland and they're generally really terrible. And so I just stick to frozen unless it's berry season. But I do buy them. Wild organic is first choice. And then if not, organic. Okay, so we don't have too many left here, which is good because we're spent a little while already. And now we're going to talk about garlic. This is another really, really big anti-cancer superfood, and has so many great qualities to it. You can't eat enough garlic. So really, if you enjoy garlic, use it liberally in your diet. And if you don't enjoy it, try to cook with it. And it's a lot less bitter and strong when it's cooked. So some garlic backstory. Garlic is also called Russian penicillin because during World War II, before penicillin became widely available, Russian medics would apply raw garlic to infected wounds of soldiers. And then the military started to refer to it as Russian penicillin. So 1 milligram of allicin, which is the active ingredient in garlic, is equivalent to 15 international units of penicillin. So it's actually very comparable in terms of its antibacterial activity. But, when you're eating garlic and it's going through your GI system, it's not the equivalent of sort of like getting a shot of, what is that allicin, that active ingredient. So it is diminished. You have to eat a lot of garlic to kind of get an equivalent dose of penicillin, but it does have a very similar biochemical activity in our body. And garlic, the good news is it's really been like left alone, unlike most things that we kind of want to make bigger, better, sweeter, something. We want to change it. Garlic really hasn't been like messed with. So it's kind of retained a lot of its wild nutrient status. Maybe that's why it's still one of like our really big superfoods. And it's a really, really strong inhibitor of tumor cell growth. And there's just countless studies. If you go on PubMed and Google garlic and cancer, you'll just have thousands and thousands of hits. It's just a really great, it's a really great superfood, and cancer is just one example, but it's really great for health, and it's certainly great for cardiovascular health as well. So just kind of giving you a little bit of a science lesson here. So one of the things that makes raw garlic so powerful, it has a protein fragment called allin, ALLIIN. I did not misspell that. And it uses some enzymes to then turn into allicin, which is sort of the potent part of the garlic. But it has to, these things are in separate compartments inside the garlic when it's whole as a plant. So when you cook garlic, you need to chop it up and activate that allicin process to be transformative, and then let it rest and let it happen before you cook it, because cooking it will kind of stop that enzyme process from working and stop it from turning from allin to allicin, which is that active ingredient. So if you're using it raw, you can just chew it and cook it, chew it and put it in your recipes, and there's no need to wait after you're using your garlic for your recipe if you're going to eat it raw. But if you're going to cook with it, you have to chop it and mince it and kind of crush those compartments within the cell wall of the garlic, and then let it sit to let that process take place to make sure you're getting the most allicin, that active ingredient in the garlic for what you're eating. So in terms of shopping for garlic, you want to look for really firm, plump, tightly encased bulbs of garlic. You don't want to see sprouting like you could see on that darker picture. There's a sprout coming off the top of that little clove. That just tells you it's old. It's been sitting around a long time and harvested a long time ago because it's already starting to sprout. You want to store garlic. My bar is blocking my ability to read my own slides. You want to store garlic in the refrigerator, away from dampness. So you do not want to store it in the crisper drawer. It stays fresher longer in the fridge than at room temperature, but just keep it away from the humidity. If you store garlic a really long time, or if you are getting it from the store and you use it right away, but it has a really, really strong pungency to it, it's probably just because it's on the older side. So it gets more pungent as it ages. Onions, another big common ingredient, produce item that we're often buying. It's also a really great anti-cancer superfood. These have been cultivated a lot, as you might imagine. We want a sweeter, bigger onion, and that's just kind of what we, what popular demands are. So let me see if I can move I don't know if I can move my camera out of the way, because right now my little video is covering part of my chart on my PowerPoint. But
So
you guys can
Paula,
talk.
we're right at we have like a little less than 5 minutes.
Perfect.
Maybe, do you want to just give a high level overview of onions? And I think you have one more after this, is that
Yeah,
correct?
just one more. We're right at
Yeah.
the end. So I think we should be fine. So you can see here that onions can really vary in antioxidant levels based on the type of onion. With the sweeter onions toward the right-hand side of this chart here, you can see they're much, much lower in antioxidant activity. So the stronger, the more pungent the onion, the more you're getting kind of the good stuff in it. The skins, again, have a lot of the nutrients. You buy them organic, and obviously you're not going to eat onion skins, but if you're making soup or kind of anything brothy where you can like, or a crock pot dish where you can kind of put the skin in there, cut the onion up with the skin, and then you can easily fish it out before you eat it. It doesn't, kind of make a mess in the cooked food. But it does have the most nutrients in it. You want to make sure you have that like tight onion, that it's not like all peeling away or soft, or there's not kind of like obvious mold on it or anything like that. Cooked onions are more nutritious, just again, like the tomatoes and the blueberries. The quercetin in there increases, and it also obviously tames the pungency of the onion, and you can caramelize onions and coax that sweetness out of them. So those are onions. And then I wanted to do a little bit more on this onion family because they really are such a powerhouse of nutrients and such a great thing to kind of work into your eating. You really can't go wrong with garlic, onions, and shallots, scallions, all of this kind of family, this allium family of foods. There's a lot of great nutrients in them. And you really, again, you don't have to worry too much about, sugars and carbs and kind of any negative kind of downsides to this. Just eat them plentifully. Shallots are milder than onions, but they're also a lot more nutrient dense. People don't buy them as often. Perhaps they're a little bit more expensive, but they do have 2 times the quercetin of a typical onion. Scallions are the ones to the far right. They're like the long, little skinny spring onions. And those are super nutrient dense. They're very similar to the wild onion. They're sort of less altered than some of these other, like the Vidalia onion is so much different than what onions used to be decades ago. So scallions are great. They have a lot more phytonutrients than the white onions, and it's mostly in the green part of the onion, which is, again, typical, more color, more nutrients. And leeks are also great. They are scallions, really, really large looking scallions, versions of scallions. And the green parts are, again, most nutritious. They're very tough though. And leeks like to hold a lot of sand. So when you got to really wash these well, slice them in half lengthwise, ideally, and really let the water run through them before you use them, because they can really hold a lot of sand in them. And you don't really want sand in your, in your finished dish. So leeks are great to use in soups or stews, because you can, put that green part in and get the nutrients out into the liquid that you are eating, and then discard that tough green stem. Just wash them well, obviously, and pick organic if you're gonna, put those in and concentrate them in like a long, slow cooked dish. And I think that's really kind of wraps up the food. Again, there are so many, just dozens and dozens of foods we couldn't really get to because time in this great book, but this gives you a little bit of an overview of kind of how it is. And there's a lot of great resources that Jo Robinson has on her website. If Stacy wants me to, I can switch over my screen to her actual website and kind of take you through that a little bit and some of the resources she has there. There's a lot of interviews where she's done some videos and interviews about her work and her findings. And she has some great little takeaways, some shopping lists and planting guides on her. These are free on her website. And there's a picture here of where she lives and her little garden. It's not so little, on a remote island in off of Washington State. And she really strives hard to grow most of her own food, and really has put into practice what she has learned in this book, and kind of has taught everyone else. So that's pretty much eating on the wild side. And
Oh, so good. So good. To honor the space of time, I think what we should do is a couple things. First and foremost, again, for those folks who dropped in a little past the time we started, Paula, please know that we have recorded this session. If you registered for the event, you're going to get the playback link along with all of the resources. We will make sure, but I want to highlight your information, Paula, because we did have quite a few pointed questions to direct questions about somebody's perhaps journey. And I want to remind our listeners that Paula, you can access her, no problem. Feel free to take a screenshot of this, or you'll have it at the end of the replay. at healthspannutrition.com. Notice her phone number is there. And of course, if you forget all of it, don't worry about it. I'll still get you to her. You can reach out to me at Stacy at believebig.org. I also want to share that in the show notes, we had one listener, Paula, while you were speaking, mentioned that they were unable to access healthier food options like fruits and vegetables organic, and that she has been enjoying a site called Misfit Market. So I put that in the sidebar chat. We can also include that into the show notes. I love that quote, and I'm going to let Paula end our discussion. But before we do, I had one last listener question, and the question was to Paula, and it said, so are the dirty dozen, the 12, are not suggested at all to eat for cancer patients? That was the question. And the reason why the question came in is I put a link in the chat that led them straight to that guide of the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So this listener wanted to know the Dirty 12 are not suggested to eat for cancer patients. That's a question.
No, that's incorrect. So I'm sorry if we gave you that impression. The dirty dozen, meaning you need to choose those really, really strongly need to choose those dirty dozen as organic only.
That's right. That's
So it's
right.
not that you should not eat them. You should absolutely eat them. But you want to make sure that of all the plants that you're choosing, if you have to prioritize which ones you can afford to get organic or which ones you have access to, etc. You
Yes.
want to focus on getting the dirty dozen ones in organic versions because they're really heavily sprayed.
Yes.
Again, most plants are, and there's some that are on, I know that are not necessarily on the dirty dozen list, but, I think potatoes are, one of them. They're not on that list and they are really heavily sprayed.
Yeah.
So, it's not an exclusive list, but I think they kind of tried to pare it down for people to make it more manageable and have somewhere to really concentrate your efforts. If I'm going to buy, I know berries are top of that list because berries, again, heavily sprayed. So if you're
Yeah.
going to berries, choose organic.
Right, right. Well, listen, this was again awesome. I always feel very blessed and grateful to spend any time with you, Paula, and I know our listeners feel the same way. I would love it if you would read this awesome quote from Dr. Mark Hyman, and we can say goodbye and just say to everybody just for the moment, and we'll be back with the next topic for sure.
Yes. So I love this quote. What you find at the end of your fork is more powerful than anything you'll find at the bottom of a pill bottle. And it's just so true.
Amen. Amen.
Yes.
Thanks,
Yes.
everybody. We look forward
Thank
to the next
you.
one, and please reach out if you have any questions at all.
Yep. Thanks for joining.
Have a
Bye-bye.
wonderful day.
Yes.